pilot refused to fly with a black man in first class. He grounded the airline for a federal racism investigation. A shocking incident on a sunlit runway would change countless lives forever. When a seasoned pilot refused to operate a Boeing 777 because a black passenger was seated in first class, nobody foresaw the avalanche of chaos that would follow. In a matter of hours, what started as a single act of blatant discrimination spiraled into a media firestorm, a legal showdown, and a searing crisis for one of America's major airlines. But beneath the headlines lay an even deeper tale about shattered assumptions, unexpected alliances, and a battle for justice that reached the highest corridors of federal power. As morning light broke over Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, rays of sunshine gleamed through the terminal windows, illuminating the hustle and bustle of travelers moving at a frenetic pace. Flight crews zigzagged through the crowd, ground staff shouted last-minute boarding calls, and passengers wheeled luggage across the polished floors. Among them was Jameson Taylor, a well-dressed businessman in his mid-30s, carrying a sleek attaché case and wearing a crisp navy blue suit. He navigated the concourse with calm determination. His eyes swept across Gate A21, where he was scheduled to board Global Skies, Flight 724 to Los Angeles. Jameson had flown countless times before, but this trip felt different. Days earlier, he had closed the biggest deal of his career, a partnership between his tech startup and a major software conglomerate. As a reward for his grueling months of negotiation, his company had sprung for a first-class ticket on Global Skies. It was a small indulgence, yet one he fully appreciated. Years of traveling in cramped economy seats had taught him to value every bit of comfort he could find. At the gate, the boarding call for first-class passengers was announced. Jameson and a handful of other travelers stepped forward. The gate agent, an affable older man with silver hair named Richard Green, took Jameson's ticket and passport, double-checked them, then handed them back with a warm smile. "Have a great flight, Mr. Taylor," Richard said. Meeting his eyes, Jameson smiled in return. "Thank you." No indication of trouble registered on anyone's face. The gate area bustled with the typical pre-flight anxiety and excitement, but nothing out of the ordinary. Jameson walked down the jet bridge, unhurried, feeling the subdued thrill of a well-earned first-class journey. Upon entering the aircraft, the flight attendants welcomed him with practiced courtesy. A tall, blonde flight attendant, named Alyssa Monroe, directed him to seat 1A. He settled in, marveling at the plush seat, the extra legroom, and the small compartment meant to store his laptop. The cabin had 8 seats. Each looked like a little slice of private heaven compared to the cramped seats in the rest of the plane. He leaned back, letting out a sigh of contentment. What he did not notice was the shift in energy that occurred the moment the first officer and captain walked through the forward boarding door. Captain Aaron Blackwell, a pilot in his early 50s with a stern-set jaw, had just enough time to glance at Jameson. It was a quick, almost unconscious flick of the eyes, but those who knew Blackwell could recognize a subtle tension forming in his features. It was the expression of a man who had just spotted something he didn't like, but wasn't sure how to address Jameson, busy taking a picture of his seat to send to his mother. Didn't catch the glare, the flight attendants moved about, offering pre-departure beverages to first-class passengers. Jameson politely declined, thinking he might work a bit before takeoff. Alyssa smiled, welcoming him again. Not long after, a gate agent stepped aboard with a final passenger manifest. The flight attendants coordinated overhead, bin placements, seat checks, and other pre-flight tasks. Like so many times before, everything about the flight seemed routine. But behind the closed cockpit door, the tension was rising. Captain Blackwell was fuming. He stared at the list of passengers. All were typical business flyers, except for one detail that shouldn't have mattered at all. The occupant of seat 1A was African American, Blackwell's prejudices deeply ingrained and seldom challenged flared. In a low tone, he muttered to his first officer, Jacob Alvarez. "This is unbelievable. I've told them before. I'm not comfortable with disruptions." Jacob glanced over. "What disruptions?" "Captain?" He was younger, less experienced, but he recognized the edge in Blackwell's voice. Captain Blackwell scowled. "Some passengers caused trouble. I don't think we should be mixing up the cabin just for appearances." Jacob blinked, uncertain if he'd heard correctly. "Sir, I don't follow." "He's got a legitimate first-class ticket." "That's normal." Blackwell's response was cold. "He's not the type of passenger I like to see in first class. And if the airline doesn't do something about it, I won't fly." Jacob was stunned. He had never witnessed such blatant prejudice from a commanding pilot, though he'd heard rumors about Blackwell's temperament. He tried to keep his tone professional. "Captain, with all due respect, we have no reason to remove him. He's done nothing wrong." "It's not about right or wrong," Blackwell snarled. "It's about principle. Word traveled fast on an airplane." The flight attendants noticed something was off when Captain Blackwell abruptly left the cockpit and marched up the aisle. He stopped a few feet from Jameson's seat, arms crossed, glaring at him. Jameson looked up and offered a polite smile, assuming maybe the captain was there to greet first-class passengers, or had some question. "Is there a problem?" Captain Jameson asked gently. Blackwell responded with a curt shake of his head and turned around, returning to the flight deck. The exchange was brief, awkward, and deeply unsettling. Jameson sensed something amiss, but dismissed the moment as a random oddity. He put on his noise-cancelling headphones and closed his eyes, trying to relax before takeoff. Minutes later, the cabin filled with the usual announcements about seatbelts and the location of emergency exits. First Officer Alvarez's voice came over the intercom, instructing the flight attendants to prepare the cabin for departure. The aircraft began to push back from the gate. Jameson felt the familiar rumble of the engines, the subtle excitement of beginning a journey. But the plane only moved a few yards from the gate before it abruptly stopped. A moment later, the engines began to power down, an unsettling sign that the flight wouldn't be taking off anytime soon. Confused murmurs spread through the cabin. Alyssa, the flight attendant, hurried up to the cockpit door, knocked softly, and whispered her question through a small opening. She returned a moment later, a forced smile on her face. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a slight technical issue and need to return to the gate." "Please remain seated," she announced with professional composure. But any trained eye could tell the hush that followed was unnatural. Flight attendants exchanged perplexed glances. Even the business travelers who were frequent flyers smelled something unusual. A technical issue usually involved more thorough explanations, cross-checking maintenance staff, boarding, or specific references. This was too abrupt, too vague. As the plane was towed back to the gate, Jameson's heart sank. He caught another glimpse of Captain Blackwell passing through the aisle again, shooting him a look of reproach. In that fleeting second, it dawned on him that this was no ordinary delay. Something deeply troubling was unfolding. The seatbelt sign dinged off and passengers began to shift nervously. Some stood up to check overhead bins, anticipating a cancelled flight or a lengthy mechanical fix. Jameson rose, grabbing his phone to call his business partner, but before he could dial, gate agents stepped on board, moving directly toward him. A hush fell over the first-class cabin. One agent cleared his throat. "Mr. Taylor, can you come with us for a moment?" Confusion and dread collided in Jameson's chest. "Is something wrong?" The gate agent hesitated, looking uncertain. "We just need to verify something with your ticket." Jameson's adrenaline spiked. He had never faced such scrutiny for a first-class ticket. As he was led off the plane, other passengers watched in stunned silence. Whispers filled the cabin. The flight attendants looked on, troubled but powerless. Meanwhile, Captain Blackwell stood in the cockpit doorway, arms still crossed, watching the scene, with a quiet, firm satisfaction. Something was terribly wrong, and Jameson Taylor was about to find out exactly how far one man's prejudice could go, and how one fateful decision might unleash a storm no one could contain. Inside the jet bridge, Jameson found himself surrounded by 2 gate agents and an operations supervisor. They were clearly uncomfortable, as if they'd been thrust into a situation they didn't know how to handle. The supervisor, a woman named Donna Malone, attempted to sound authoritative. "Mr. Taylor, we apologize for the inconvenience." Donna began glancing at her clipboard. "We just need to confirm a few details about your reservation. May I see your boarding pass again? And your ID?" Jameson complied, handing over his documents. "Is there a problem? I've flown multiple times with Global Skies, and I've never been pulled from a flight like this." "Your ticket checks out," Donna said, after a moment, looking more perplexed by the second. "We're not entirely sure why Captain Blackwell insisted on this." Captain Blackwell Jameson repeated tension knotting in his stomach. "He specifically requested that I be removed from the plane." She shifted uncomfortably. The captain cited a concern, "But we're not at liberty to discuss it until we investigate. We might move you to another flight or reseat you if you'd like to remain on flight 724. Jameson's eyes widened. "Wait, so the only reason I'm being questioned is that the captain has a concern about me? Have I done anything wrong?" Donna looked down at the floor. "No, sir. As far as we can tell, you haven't." Outside, more passengers were beginning to disembark. The technical issue story wasn't holding up. People were told to wait in the boarding area, leading to confusion and frustration. In the commotion, Jameson overheard bits of conversation from other passengers. "This is ridiculous," a man said, checking his watch. "I have a meeting in LA this afternoon. I don't see any maintenance crew. What's the real hold-up?" Asked another. Jameson's mind spun. Should he confront the captain directly? Should he demand an explanation or call for a manager? His breath quickened. The humiliating possibility that this was about race seeped into his thoughts. A member of the airline's ground security staff showed up, a tall woman named Karen Lancaster, with a gentle but firm demeanor. She tried to calm things down, gesturing for Jameson to follow her. "Let's step into this office." "Mr. Taylor," she said softly, ushering him into a cramped side room adjacent to the gate. Inside there was a table, a few chairs, and a wall plastered with various airline protocols. "I'm sorry about all of this," she continued. "We're just trying to figure out what's happening." Jameson took a seat. "That makes 2 of us." Karen sighed, pulling up a seat across from him. "From what I've been told, the captain is refusing to fly the plane unless you're reseated or removed from the flight entirely." The weight of her words hung in the air. It was baffling. "This is absolutely insane," Jameson said, voice quivering with anger. "I paid for my seat. I've done nothing wrong. How can he refuse to fly just because I'm sitting in first class?" Karen hesitated. He cited passenger behavior concerns, but we've got no evidence of any incident. None of the flight attendants reported a problem. Jameson's face flushed with heat. "This is unacceptable. Can I speak to someone higher up? A manager? Someone from corporate?" Donna Malone stepped into the small office. Her voice hushed. "Our station manager is tied up with another issue right now, but we're trying to get him here ASAP. In the meantime, we'd like to offer you a seat in business class on another flight, or at least move you to another part of the cabin on this flight. Every muscle in Jameson's body tensed. He thought of the conference he needed to attend in Los Angeles, of the business partners waiting for him, of the humiliating spectacle unfolding. "This is discrimination," he said, quietly, measuring his words. "I'm not giving up my seat." Donna exchanged a glance with Karen. They both looked upset, though not necessarily at Jameson. "We understand," Donna said softly. "We're doing everything we can to mediate, but the captain is within his rights to refuse to operate if he claims a safety or security concern." Jameson clenched his fists. He knew about the broad authority pilots held. He also knew it could be abused. "Well, if he's going to pull this stunt, I want it on record that I did nothing to justify his actions." A tense silence followed, broken by the muffled sound of the airport loudspeaker calling for final boarding on unrelated flights. Karen nodded. "We're documenting everything." Mr. Taylor, a swirl of frustration and anxiety, engulfed him. For years he had worked tirelessly to prove himself in corporate settings, always mindful of the extra hurdles he faced as a black man. He'd navigated microaggressions, stereotypes, and overlooked promotions, but he never anticipated being kicked off an airplane simply because he dared to sit in first class. Outside the office door, the corridor buzzed with activity. More passengers from Flight 724 were lining up at the gate podium demanding answers. Donna excused herself to address the crowd. She explained the flight was delayed due to operational difficulties. The announcement satisfied few tensions were rising. Meanwhile, Captain Blackwell remained in the cockpit, his stance unchanged. Flight attendants were in a quandary, forced to relay messages that made little sense. The rumor mill churned among the passengers. Some believed there was a mechanical failure. Others guessed a security threat. Whispers began to circulate that something more sinister was afoot. Finally, Jerome Hightower, the station manager, arrived, a broad-shouldered man with a disarming smile. He stepped into the office. "Mr. Taylor," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Jerome, station manager here. I apologize for this chaos." Jameson took his hand with a firm grip. "I'd appreciate an explanation. This is humiliating." Jerome nodded, pulling up a chair. "We're dealing with a very unusual situation. The captain has authority over the flight, but I can override him if I find his claims unfounded. I'm here to gather the facts." Karen handed him a file of paperwork with details from the flight attendants who had reported no incidents of problematic behavior from Jameson. Jerome scanned it, frowning. "Mr. Taylor." Jerome said, "Did you have any interaction with the captain or crew before boarding?" "None. I just boarded and took my seat like everyone else." Jerome sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. "I need to speak with Captain Blackwell directly. With your permission, I'd also like you to remain here or in the boarding area while I figure this out. If the captain has no evidence of any wrongdoing, I'll do everything in my power to put you back on that plane." Jameson nodded, relief and anger mingling in his chest. "I'll wait." Jerome left the office, and Karen sat beside Jameson, offering a small bottle of water. "I'm really sorry you're going through this." Jameson accepted the water but didn't open it. His mind was too cluttered, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "This is the craziest thing that's ever happened to me." "Do you see this often?" Karen shook her head. "Not like this. Disagreements happen. Sometimes passengers get upset. But it's rare for a captain to single someone out without cause." A cold silence enveloped the room. For Jameson, a swirl of thoughts rose to the surface. How should he handle this? Should he simply walk away, get a ticket on a different airline, and never look back? Or should he stay and fight, ensuring that this injustice was recorded and confronted. After 10 minutes, which felt like an hour, Jerome returned, his face grim. "Captain Blackwell claims you were hostile toward a flight attendant and made threatening remarks about the flight's safety." Jameson's jaw dropped. "That's a lie." Jerome held up his hand. "I just spoke with Alyssa Monroe, the first-class flight attendant. She denies any confrontation. She said you were polite and barely spoke a word. I also spoke to other staff who said they saw nothing of the sort." "Then what's the hold-up?" Jameson demanded. Jerome exhaled. "The captain is sticking to his story, and the airline's protocol states that if a captain deems a passenger a safety risk, ground management must carefully investigate. The flight is delayed indefinitely now. We're looking at possibly swapping to another crew, but that could take hours and it's not guaranteed. If I try to force him to fly against his will, we'll face union issues." Anxiety shifted into outrage. Jameson gripped his attaché case. "So one bigoted man gets to hold an entire plane hostage." Jerome's silence was telling. In that pause, Jameson recognized the unspoken reality. Captain Blackwell's position gave him a degree of unchecked power. The airline, desperate to avoid a messy public confrontation, might be inclined to quietly shuffle Jameson onto another flight and move on. But for Jameson, that would be tantamount to giving in to racism. "I'm not going anywhere," Jameson stated calmly. "I have the right to that seat, and I'm not about to let him get away with this." Jerome seemed torn. "I understand. Let me see what I can do." Outside, frustrated passengers circulated. Some drifted by the glass walls of the side office, glancing at Jameson in curiosity or sympathy. The overhead announcement asked for patience, referencing a flight crew issue. Over the next half hour, airline employees scrambled, trying to calm the growing crowd. A rumor reached Jameson's ears that the pilot was refusing to depart because someone suspicious was in first class. The rumor carried a palpable sense of racial bias. The turning point came when a local news crew, tipped off by an airport employee or perhaps a passenger, arrived at the gate cameras rolling. They approached random travelers trying to piece together the drama. Within moments, Jameson saw the camera light flick on outside the glass office. The reporter, a woman named Kayla Barnes from Channel 7, peered inside, raising an eyebrow at the sight of Jameson. Instinctively, Jameson felt a pang of hesitation. Did he really want to go public? The fear of negative publicity wrestled with his moral obligation to expose the truth. Then he thought about the decades of struggle he and others in his community had faced about the flying while black stories that occasionally went viral. He knew that silence only enabled future injustices. He stood, straightened his suit jacket, and walked out to meet the reporter. "Excuse me," Kayla said, microphone in hand. "Are you the passenger at the center of this situation?" Jameson took a measured breath, aware that his next words carried weight. "I am." Kayla nodded. "Can you tell us what's happening?" Jameson looked directly into the camera. His voice clear. "I was removed from Global Skies Flight 724 in first class. The captain claims I was a threat." "That's a lie. I was polite. I paid for my seat, and I did nothing wrong. I believe this is a case of discrimination, and I won't stand for it." The camera lingered on him. Kayla's expression showed a spark of sympathy. "You're saying the captain is refusing to fly because of you specifically, and you believe it's racially motivated." "That's exactly what I'm saying." Behind him, Jerome appeared, his face betraying concern over the PR nightmare unfolding. Passengers craned their necks to watch the on-camera interview. Some recorded with their phones. The tension at the gate spiked as Kayla turned her mic to Jerome, who quickly deflected. stating there was an internal inquiry ongoing, but the damage was done. Within minutes, footage from Kayla's broadcast reached social media, traveling faster than anyone could control. Hashtags like Nyako for Global Skies, racism, and I'm course grounded by prejudice began to appear on Twitter and Instagram. The story was out, and it was only going to get bigger. When news of the incident hit social platforms, it went viral. Passengers still stranded at Gate A21 posted videos of the delayed plane, lamenting their missed connections, and tagging Global Skies in tweets, criticizing the airline's apparent discrimination. One passenger's video captured Captain Blackwell walking down the jet bridge with a scowl, refusing to answer questions. Another clip showed Jameson calmly explaining the situation to the gate staff. By the time corporate communications at Global Skies headquarters in Chicago caught wind of the fiasco, the story had already been picked up by at least 5 major news outlets. The airline's phone lines lit up. Emails flooded the press department. A team of PR executives, led by a sharp-minded director named Annabelle Nguyen, scrambled to craft a response. Their first statement read, "We are aware of an incident involving a passenger on Flight 724 from Atlanta to Los Angeles. The flight crew identified a safety concern, and we are investigating all claims. Global Skies remains committed to ensuring the comfort and safety of all passengers." It was a boilerplate message, vague and non-committal, but it did little to quell the growing outrage. Social media users demanded a more transparent explanation, fueling a wave of negative comments and calls for a boycott. Back in Atlanta, the tension was reaching a breaking point. Jerome paced near the gate podium, phone pressed to his ear, giving updates to corporate Donna Malone and Karen Lancaster, tried to manage the frustrated passengers, many of whom now blamed the airline for the fiasco. Some approached Jameson to express solidarity, offering words of support. "I'm so sorry you're going through this," said a middle-aged woman named Samantha Ortiz on her way to visit her son in LA. "I saw how that pilot looked at you. This isn't right." Others vented their frustration at the airline, shouting at Donna or the gate agents for information. Meanwhile, Captain Blackwell refused to leave the cockpit, demanding that the airline remove Jameson for safety reasons. The plane sat idle, a glaring symbol of the standoff. Amid the turmoil, a new figure arrived, Ashley Henry, a legal counsel representing Global Skies at the Atlanta airport. She carried a tablet loaded with the airline's regulations and passenger rights. Upon meeting Jameson in the small side office, she offered a professional handshake. "Mr. Taylor, I'm Ashley Henry," she said. "I'm here on behalf of Global Skies to sort this out." Jameson raised his eyebrows. "Is that so? Because from where I stand, the airline seems more interested in protecting Captain Blackwell than addressing his discrimination." Ashley cleared her throat. "I understand your frustration. We're taking the allegations seriously, but we need to be thorough. We're prepared to rebook you immediately in first class on another flight. No extra cost, plus a travel voucher for your trouble." Jameson's face tightened. "You think you can pay me off with a travel voucher? I don't want a band-aid fix. What about holding the captain accountable?" Ashley's gaze flickered with a hint of unease. "All complaints against crew members go through an internal review process. He'll be questioned, and if found at fault, the airline will take appropriate action." Jameson's fists clenched. "I want a public admission that this was racist. I want an apology, and I want to make sure no one else experiences what I'm going through right now." Ashley pressed her lips together. "I'm not in a position to make statements on behalf of the entire corporation, but I can assure you we are reviewing everything." He gave a bitter laugh. "Meanwhile, My time and dignity are being stomped on. Ashley glanced at her watch. Another Global Skies flight to Los Angeles leaves in less than an hour from Concourse B. I can personally escort you and guarantee you'll receive first-class service. Jameson stared back, unwavering. My meeting in LA is later today, so I still have time, but this isn't just about making it on time anymore, if I step away quietly. Now the pilot wins. He'll do this again to someone else. Ashley placed her tablet on the table, trying a more conciliatory tone. I understand the principle, but from a practical standpoint, the pilot has the FAA-backed authority to remove anyone he deems a security risk. Jameson shook his head. And that's exactly why we can't let him hide behind that authority. He's using it to justify racism. Just then there was a soft knock at the door. A local representative from the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA Inspector Mark Bloom, poked his head in. He wore a regulation uniform and carried a small notepad. Am I interrupting? Ashley turned. Inspector, I'm Ashley Henry, legal counsel for Global Skies. I'm speaking with Mr. Taylor right now. Bloom stepped inside. I'm here to understand what's going on. We received multiple calls from the airline and from individuals claiming a pilot is refusing to fly due to alleged racial bias. The FAA is mandated to investigate any claim that might affect aviation safety, including abuses of pilot authority. A jolt of cautious optimism rose in Jameson. If the FAA was involved, maybe there would be real oversight. Ashley tried to retain composure. We appreciate your prompt response, Inspector. We're handling the internal aspects, but your insight is welcome. Mark Bloom focused on Jameson. Taylor, could you explain in your own words what occurred? Jameson recounted every detail, boarding the uncomfortable stare being escorted off the plane, the pilot's false accusations, and the airline's attempts to shuffle him onto another flight. Bloom took notes diligently, occasionally nodding. When Jameson finished, Inspector Bloom sighed. I'd like to speak with the captain as well. If a pilot is refusing to operate a flight based on nothing more than personal prejudice, that's a serious matter. The FAA expects all flight crews to handle authority responsibly. There could be repercussions if we find misconduct, Ashley interjected. We also want a fair process. The captain asserts that Mr. Taylor made threatening remarks, so we'll need statements from the cabin crew as well. Bloom nodded. We're gathering that. Meanwhile, the airline has cancelled Flight 724. We have hundreds of stranded passengers. This situation has escalated quickly. Cancelled, Jameson's shoulders sagged. He thought about the other people, affected men and women who just wanted to get to L.A. The weight of guilt pressed on him, though logically he knew the blame lay with Blackwell. Let me talk to the flight attendants, Bloom said, and the gate agents. Then I'll request a formal interview with Captain Blackwell. Ashley checked her phone. We've got an entire communications storm brewing. The earlier this is resolved, the better for everyone. Jameson locked eyes with Inspector Bloom. I just want the truth exposed. I'm not out for money or a vendetta, but this can't go unchallenged. Bloom gave him a measured look. Understood. Let's see what the evidence shows. The FAA inspector stepped out, leaving Jameson and Ashley alone again. She typed something on her tablet, presumably drafting an official statement. The hallway echoed with the drone of irritated passengers, the bustle of staff, and the occasional beep from the overhead announcements. In that pressurized moment, Jameson's phone buzzed. It was a text from his best friend, Chris Sanders, who had seen the viral video. Chris bro, are you okay? This is blowing up online. Everyone's talking about it. If you need any support, I got you. Jameson felt a wave of gratitude. He typed back quickly, telling Chris he was holding up that the FAA was now involved. The phone buzzed again, with messages from colleagues and acquaintances, all outraged, offering solidarity or advice. The minutes crawled by Ashley, made a few phone calls. Stepping into the corridor for more privacy, Jameson heard snippets. "We're doing everything we can. The pilot is stonewalling. The media coverage is intensifying. Yes, the FAA is here." Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the gate. Loud voices and argument. Jameson rushed out of the office to see Captain Blackwell, face red, towering over Inspector Bloom. The pilot's arms flailed as he insisted on the threatening behavior from Jameson. Bloom's expression was calm but firm, letting the pilot rant nearby. A cluster of bystanders, including some off-duty airport staff, watched with shock. "You people are ignoring protocol," Blackwell shouted. "That man was aggressive, and I have the right to protect my plane." Bloom responded evenly. "We have statements from your flight attendants contradicting your claim." "Sir, if you can't produce specific evidence," Blackwell cut him off. "You think a pilot with over 20 years of experience would lie? This is a witch hunt. I'm the one being discriminated against because I'm standing up for safety." A hush fell, the tension thick enough to be cut with a knife. Bloom kept his professional composure. "Captain, I'd advise you to calm down. We'll handle this systematically." In that heated moment, it was as if the entire terminal paused, collectively holding its breath. Blackwell glared at Jameson, who had joined the onlookers at a short distance. The pilot's nostrils flared. "This is outrageous," he muttered, then stormed off toward a restricted corridor, presumably to the airline's crew lounge. The crowd began murmuring again. Some filmed the scene on their phones, likely uploading more content to social media. Inspector Bloom turned to Jameson and gave him a subtle nod as if to say, "I see what's going on here." The tension, once simmering, was boiling over. Within the hour, Flight 724 was officially cancelled. Passengers fumed. Global Skies offered meal vouchers and hotel accommodations for those who needed them. But the damage was done. All the while, the video of Blackwell's outburst began circulating online, fueling the narrative that this was no minor misunderstanding, but a blatant act of racial bias. By the next morning, headlines about the fiasco at Hartsfield-Jackson filled news feeds. Pilot grounds, flight over alleged racism. Airline launches investigation. FAA probes, Global Skies. Incident did. Captain abuse authority. Traveler claims discrimination. He didn't want me in first class. Jameson woke up in a hotel room near the airport, courtesy of the airline's travel voucher. Though exhausted, he felt a strange resolve. He scrolled through social media, reading messages of support, as well as the inevitable trollish remarks. One tweet in particular from a famous civil rights lawyer caught his eye. "If allegations are true, we're witnessing a deeply troubling abuse of power. The aviation industry must hold bigots accountable." Outside the world roiled with debate. Some insisted Jameson must have done something suspicious for a pilot to react that way. Others recognized the centuries-old pattern of racial profiling, pointing out how frequently black travelers had faced wrongful suspicion in public spaces. At 8 a.m., Jameson's phone rang. It was Michelle Dawson, an attorney who specialized in civil rights litigation. She introduced herself, stating she had seen the news and wanted to discuss possible legal remedies if Jameson was interested. "Taylor, your story resonates with many people." Michelle said, "If you decide to file a discrimination lawsuit, you could hold the airline accountable and push for systemic changes." Jameson hesitated. Lawsuits were messy, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. But he'd also realized this went far beyond just him. If no one stood up, Nothing would change. I'd like to hear more. I won't decide right away. But I'm open to discussing it. Let's meet, Michelle suggested, perhaps at a cafe near the airport. Sure, Jameson agreed. Less than an hour later, they sat across from each other at a small table in a bustling cafe. Michelle, a poised woman in her 40s, had a commanding presence. She laid out the legal landscape in simple terms. You could pursue multiple avenues, she explained. One is to file a complaint with the U.S. Department of Transportation's Aviation Consumer Protection Division. They oversee racial discrimination cases in the airline industry. Another is a civil lawsuit in federal court, given this might violate Title II of the Civil Rights Act or other federal statutes related to public accommodations. Jameson sipped his coffee, a swirl of apprehension in his gut. Would that be a drawn-out process? It can be, Michelle admitted, but it often leads to settlements. Also, the publicity may incentivize the airline to address the root issue. The FAA probe might support your case if they find the captain acted improperly. Jameson thought about his startup, the time he'd need to invest the potential media circus. What do you recommend? Michelle paused. I recommend we at least file the initial complaint with DOT. It's a formal process, and if nothing else, it puts pressure on the airline to respond transparently. He nodded, mind made up. Let's do it. With that decision, the next steps fell into place. Michelle guided Jameson through drafting a statement, recounting the events, attaching witness accounts and links to social media evidence. Together they emailed it to the Department of Transportation. Within minutes, they received an automated response confirming receipt. That afternoon, Jameson found himself returning to the airport. Inspector Bloom from the FAA had asked if he could provide a recorded statement. Jameson wanted to comply, hoping it would strengthen the case. Meeting in a small conference room near the airline offices, he sat across from Bloom, who had a tape recorder on the table. Mr. Taylor, I appreciate your cooperation, Bloom said. We're trying to ascertain if Captain Blackwell violated FAA regulations, or if he used his authority in a manner that's inconsistent with our guidelines. This is a formal interview, so please just speak clearly. Jameson recounted the incident again, step by step, from entering the plane to being escorted off. Bloom asked, clarifying questions about the captain's demeanor, any direct quotes, and the timeline of events. Finally, Bloom clicked off the recorder. Thank you. This helps us. We've already obtained statements from the flight attendants, gate agents, and some passengers, and Jameson asked quietly, what did they say? Bloom tapped his notepad. The flight attendants unanimously contradict the captain's claim of threatening behavior. Some passengers saw the captain glaring at you, and none witnessed you causing a disturbance. The pilot stands alone in his version of events. Jameson exhaled. So he lied. Bloom shrugged diplomatically. We're still investigating, but it looks that way. The FAA can issue sanctions if we find a pilot's conduct jeopardized safety or was unprofessional to a degree that violates federal guidelines. For the first time since the ordeal began, Jameson felt a ripple of relief. Thank you for being thorough. Bloom nodded. We'll stay in touch. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry you've had to go through this. Jameson stepped out of the conference room, a mixture of validation and lingering anger in his heart. Outside the terminal thronged with passengers going about their day, oblivious to the saga that had consumed his life for the past 24 hours. He checked his phone. The media frenzy hadn't died down. If anything, it was intensifying. Multiple high-profile figures, including politicians and prominent activists, had chimed in on social media, calling for the airline to remove Captain Blackwell. Enough is enough, one comment read. We can't have bigots operating commercial flights. Inside the sleek, high-rise housing Global Skies corporate headquarters in Chicago, a tense meeting of top executives was underway. CEO Marilyn Foster led the discussion. Present were legal counsel, the head of HR, the chief pilot, and Annabelle Nguyen from PR. The walls were adorned with the airline's logo, ironically touting a mission statement about providing top-tier hospitality and inclusions. Annabelle. "How bad is it?" Marilyn asked, leaning forward at the long conference table. Bad, Annabelle replied grimly. "We're trending for all the wrong reasons. Stock is taking a hit, down 4%. Since this morning, hashtags calling for a boycott. Prominent civil rights groups are planning a protest at several airports next week." Marilyn rubbed her temples. "And the FAA investigation." The chief pilot, Anthony Reeves, cleared his throat. "They're looking into whether Captain Blackwell misused his authority. If they conclude he acted improperly, it could lead to suspension or revocation of his license. That alone is massive liability for us." The legal counsel, Peter Winslow, added, "Sir, Taylor's attorney filed a complaint with the DOT. We could face a federal discrimination lawsuit as well. We need to decide how to respond." Marilyn's eyes flashed with frustration. "Blackwell has been with us for over a decade. I knew he had some old-fashioned attitudes, but I had no idea it ran this deep." Silence hung in the room as the executives weighed their options. Finally, Marilyn spoke again, her voice laced with exasperation. "We may have no choice but to suspend him, possibly terminate. That would at least show we're taking action." Peter folded his arms. "Then he might sue us for wrongful termination, claiming he acted on a genuine security concern. He has strong union representation. This could get messy." Marilyn's jaw tightened. "Everything about this is messy, but we have to do the right thing. Let's start with a suspension, pending the FAA and internal investigation. That's standard procedure." They discussed the precariousness of the airline's position. Terminating the pilot too hastily could open them up to one lawsuit, while retaining him would likely inflame public outrage and invite more lawsuits. Meanwhile, employees were demanding clarity, anxious that the scandal tarnished their workplace reputation. Annabelle spoke up. "Whatever we do, we need to release a strong statement. A real one, not just platitudes. We should apologize directly to Mr. Taylor and the passengers." Marilyn nodded. "Draft something comprehensive. We'll finalize it by tomorrow morning." Meanwhile, far from Chicago, Jameson had finally caught a flight to Los Angeles on a different airline, ironically late the previous evening. Exhausted yet resolute, he arrived at his hotel and connected with colleagues. He delivered his presentation at the tech conference, though his mind still buzzed with the events of the past 2 days. At the conference's networking event, people approached Jameson, recognizing him from the viral clips. Some offered words of encouragement. Others asked for an autograph or a selfie, unbelievably turning him into a reluctant celebrity. Throughout the evening, a sense of surrealness clung to him. A week ago, he was just an ambitious entrepreneur. Now he had inadvertently become a public figure in a civil rights storm. Later in his hotel room, Michelle Dawson called with an update. Global Skies just announced they've suspended Captain Blackwell pending investigations. Jameson sank into a chair, relief mingling with lingering anger. That's a start. And they're offering an official apology, though it's carefully worded. Michelle continued. They want to set up a meeting with you to discuss a settlement. Jameson almost laughed in exasperation. Settlement. After all this, I don't just want hush money. I want structural change. Training policies that prevent this from happening again. Accountability measures. Michelle's tone was firm. We can push for that. Leverage is on our side right now. Public opinion is overwhelmingly in your favor." He nodded, thinking of the bigger picture. "I'm not naive. I know the airline will want this to go away, but they need to address the root problem. I'll schedule a conversation with their legal team." Michelle said, "We'll see what they're willing to commit to." After hanging up, Jameson stared at the city lights outside his window. The pilot was suspended, but that didn't erase the humiliation he'd felt, nor the frustration of knowing how many others might face similar treatment if no one spoke up. He resolved to keep fighting, not just for himself, but for anyone who might be the next target of prejudice. 2 weeks passed, filled with negotiations, media interviews, and continued public pressure on Global Skies. The FAA's preliminary findings indicated Captain Blackwell had no credible grounds for deeming Jameson a threat. In fact, the report noted that Blackwell's actions were inconsistent with standard protocols and showed a pattern of personal bias. When the document leaked to a prominent news site, the public outcry soared again, under immense pressure. Global Skies terminated Blackwell's employment, citing a violation of company policy and code of conduct. The pilots' union initially threatened to strike, claiming the airline failed to follow due process, but the union's leadership quickly backed off when they saw the damning FAA evidence. No one wanted to defend an obviously biased pilot and damage the union's own reputation. Blackwell, however, was not one to go quietly. On a Monday morning, he appeared on a conservative talk show, ranting about reverse racism and agenda-driven conspiracies. He claimed Jameson was part of a plot to ruin his career, but this only made matters worse. Social media dissected his statements, highlighting every contradictory or offensive remark. Sponsors of the TV show faced backlash, and the host hastily distanced himself from Blackwell. For Jameson, the weeks were a whirlwind. He filed an official Title VI complaint, received a call from the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice expressing interest in the case, and sat in multiple meetings with Global Skies representatives. Finally, the airline offered a settlement that included a public apology, monetary damages, and the establishment of a diversity and inclusion task force. Jameson insisted the airline commit to training employees to recognize and avoid racial profiling, as well as setting up a grievance system for passengers. After some push and pull, they agreed. On a crisp morning, a formal press conference was held in Atlanta. A podium was set up in front of a backdrop with the Global Skies logo. CEO Marilyn Foster stepped up to the microphone, offering a carefully prepared apology. "At Global Skies, we failed, Mr. Jameson Taylor and the passengers of Flight 724. She began, her voice echoing through the room. "We recognize that discrimination in any form is unacceptable. Our internal investigation revealed that Captain Aaron Blackwell acted out of personal bias. He was swiftly terminated. We extend our deepest apologies to Mr. Taylor for the distress and humiliation he endured." Jameson stood off to the side, flanked by Michelle Dawson. Cameras flashed, capturing his composed but serious expression. Once Marilyn finished, she invited Jameson to speak. He stepped to the podium, heart pounding, scanning the sea of journalists and cameras. "I appreciate Global Skies for taking this step," he said. "But let's not forget, this case is about more than just me. It's about ensuring that no pilot or airline staff can weaponize their authority based on prejudice. I'm glad we've come to an agreement that includes better training and accountability. I hope this sets a precedent across the airline industry." Thunderous clicks of camera shutters filled the air, along with the rustle of reporters taking notes. In that moment, Jameson felt a sense of justice, tempered by the knowledge that the fight against racism was far from over. Still, this victory stood as a beacon for those who'd been marginalized. Weeks later, the FAA's final report landed, recommending that Captain Blackwell's pilot license be suspended for no less than a year due to gross misuse of authority and endangerment of flight operations by creating an unnecessary delay. This effectively grounded him. The Department of Transportation endorsed the finding, and Blackwell's hopes of returning to commercial aviation were dashed karma. It seemed had come for Blackwell hard. His inability to accept a black man in first class cost him his career and reputation. The airline faced financial losses, lawsuits and brand damage, all stemming from one man's bigotry. Yet from the debris of that turmoil arose a call for reform. Global skies, now under microscopic scrutiny, pledged to improve. It set a new industry standard by working with civil rights groups, the FAA and the DOT, to develop policies designed to root out bias in flight operations. For Jameson, life would never be quite the same. He emerged from the ordeal more resolute, more vocal. His business thrived, bolstered by the networking opportunities that came from his unexpected notoriety. Invitations poured in to speak on panels about racial justice, corporate accountability, and the need for inclusive practices. Despite the personal cost, he discovered a new sense of purpose. And so the story that began with a single seat in first class ended with a federal investigation and a cascade of changes that shook one of the largest airlines in the world. It was a dramatic, twist-filled chapter in the ongoing battle against prejudice, a vivid reminder that sometimes the stubborn will of one determined individual could spark a nationwide reckoning. From an ordinary boarding call to a historic showdown, Jameson Taylor's story captured the world's attention, and for good reason. In standing up against a pilot who wielded bigotry like a weapon, he helped trigger investigations by the FAA, the Department of Transportation, and ultimately forced an entire airline to confront its own systemic flaws. The price he paid, both emotionally and professionally, was steep, yet his courage delivered lasting results. A discriminatory captain lost his license, while Global Skies pledged to overhaul training and accountability. If this tale moved you, if it sparked conversation or opened your eyes to the realities of bias, then please help it reach others. Like, share and subscribe to ensure more stories of justice and transformation. Find their voice. After all, real change begins when we refuse to let prejudice fly anywhere in any seat.